Chesapeake location, just prior to a frac job they did on a deep Rogersville Shale well. So we'll be looking at some of those new developments here in the next few slides. I thought I'd start out by talking about what are unconventional reservoirs or unconventional resources. You may have heard that term, but these are rocks and reservoirs that are characterized by low permeability or very heavy, viscous, immovable oil. So there are a lot of rocks that have low permeability, that contain hydrocarbons that are difficult to move or to produce. These can include formations in rock types such as shale, tight sandstones, coal beds. And in many cases, unconventional reservoirs, a source rock for the hydrocarbons are now the same as the reservoir. So that's been the real fundamental change, is instead of looking for reservoir rocks, we're actually directing our exploration efforts at the source rocks themselves and producing hydrocarbons from the source rocks where they were generated. The one thing that sort of characterizes all unconventional reservoirs is the fact that special technology is needed to produce the hydrocarbons at economic rates. The permeability or the oil quality of these reservoirs is just too low using normal technology. So special techniques such as hydraulic fracturing or steam floods, things like that, are required to make these reservoirs viable. And I do want to emphasize that unconventionals are not really new in Kentucky at all. Kentucky has had production, primarily gas production, from unconventional shale reservoirs for decades. So we're quite familiar with shale gas reservoirs, that sort of thing. The thing that is new is some of these newer plays that are producing oil and have the potential to produce at much higher rates than some of our older, lower pressure shale reservoirs. And this unconventional revolution, the reason you've heard so much about it and you've actually benefited from the effects of unconventional reservoirs is that these rocks across the country have much larger reserves than conventional reservoirs. If you look at, there we go, typically a conventional reservoir, these are places where the oil and gas has migrated through porous and permeable rocks and been trapped either in an anticline, in a pinch out, up against a fault. So traditionally we've looked for places the oil and gas has migrated to. And these tend to be fairly isolated, small pockets of oil and gas. And there's a large amount of risk in drilling these, that the seal may not be good here, the oil and gas may have migrated out, the structure may not have been present when the oil and gas migrated. There's a lot of different ways that these can go bad or be unsuccessful. In contrast, this unconventional reservoir revolution is drilling into the source rock. Here's a shale formation here. We can drill down either directionally or horizontally into the shale formation and actually produce hydrocarbons that remain in the source rock themselves. And in the past, that's been hard to do, but with new technology, horizontal drilling, hydraulic fracturing, the hydrocarbons that are still contained in these shale formations can be economically produced. So what this does, it generates much larger reserves. These formations have a much greater volume than the isolated conventional reservoirs. Many of these are a much higher pressure than conventional reservoirs. So some of these rocks, the fluids, the oil and gas, are actually supporting some of the lithostatic loads, so you end up with overpressured reservoirs that produce at much higher rates. And obviously, companies love the lower risk because you can drill anywhere in this formation and pretty much have a strong degree of success in producing oil or gas. And many of these unconventional reservoirs have turned into essentially farming operations where you just go in and space your wells appropriately and just drill these things up like you're plowing a field or producing a crop. So the lower risk and the larger reserves and the higher production rates has really been the thing that has pushed the unconventionals to the top of people's interest. in the oil and gas business. And it's also resulted in a huge supply of natural gas, a huge supply of oil, and we've all benefited from much lower prices for those commodities. In Kentucky here, we have a couple of new unconventional plays that have developed in the last 4 or 5 years. The first I'll talk about is the Upper Devonian Berea Sandstone. This is being developed in Greenup, Lawrence, and Johnson counties in eastern Kentucky. Activity as a horizontal play has been going on since about 2011. It is characterized by low volume hydraulic fractures. These are very shallow reservoirs, 700 to 1,000, 1,600 feet average depth. So we're looking at a formation that's not very, very deeply, and companies are using fairly small hydraulic fractures and horizontal drilling to develop these reservoirs. This is the Berea actually outcrops in northeastern Kentucky. This is a photograph of one of the outcrops that helps us to visualize and understand the reservoir in the subsurface. And the second one I'll talk about is a much deeper formation, the Cambrian Rogersville Shale. This is in the Rome Trough, a deep fault-bounded graben in the Cambrian part of the section, our deepest formations. This activity is going on, again, coincidentally, in Lawrence and Johnson counties. This play is in the very, very early appraisal phase. There's no commercial production right now. Almost all of the data is still confidential, but we do think that the Rogersville is going to be producing gas and oil eventually. As I said, much deeper, 9 to 10,000 feet in Kentucky and up to 14,000 feet in West Virginia. And because of the depth and pressures, this formation requires high volume hydraulic fracture stimulation to bring the hydrocarbons to the surface. The map on the right here is first of all, a depiction in yellow of the outline of the Rome Trough. This is an extensional fault-bounded basin that developed in the early Cambrian. And then superimposed on that is an outline of the Rogersville Shale. I'll talk more about that, but this is the area where we think the Rogersville Shale occurs in the subsurface. Okay, stepping back to the Berea Sandstone, this is an Upper Devonian Range formation. It's a marine shelf siltstone and very fine sandstone, so this is a very, very fine-grained clastic unit. It does have good porosity, 10 to 12% porosity, but very low permeability due to the fine grain size and a number of different diagenetic events. The permeabilities are down in the 1 to 2 millidarcy range, whereas a conventional reservoir may be several hundred millidarcies. So very, very low permeability here. And it is encased above and below by organic rich shales. It's overlain, the Berea shown in yellow here, it's overlain by the Sunbury Shale, and it's underlain by the Devonian Ohio Shale. So these are both proven source rocks, so it's in an ideal position to serve as a reservoir for hydrocarbons generated in the over or underlying shales. The horizontal play in the Berea is actually being conducted in an older area. This area, the Berea has produced from vertical wells for decades, and it was designated a tight gas sand back in the 80s. But this is a whole new play using horizontal drilling both in Greenup County up to the north here, as well as Lawrence County in this area. Activity has spread into Johnson County in this area. So this is really the northeastern corridor for the Berea play. As I said, it is considered a tight sand, and the key technology is horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing. The average fluid size for the frac stimulations is about 250,000 gallons, which is below the level that's considered a high volume hydraulic fracture. And again, a characteristic is the very shallow depth. These rocks are not very, very, very deeply, 700 to 1,600 feet. And production rates that they're seeing from these wells being reported to the state anywhere from 20 to 200 barrels per day. So they're quite good production rates from these. That's oil production, obviously, from the Berea. The biggest impact this has, it has basically turned around our statewide oil production curve. This is a historic chart from 1980 through 2015. And when I joined the survey in 1990, we sort of started on a continual downward trend of oil production. And I really never thought I would see this turn around. But when this Berea play kicked in about 2011 here, you can see that it actually increased our state oil production. In 2014, we had a 75% increase over 2011. Now in 2015, we saw another drop, and that's mainly because of low oil prices that we've seen in the last 2 years. Drilling has been curtailed, and we're starting to see a drop-off, but that's sort of an artifact of low prices right now. So this has been the most fundamental change, is the tremendous increase, and then the movement of Western Kentucky has traditionally been our biggest oil-producing area. Lawrence County is now our top oil-producing county in the state. Shifting gears here to the Rogersville, this is part of the Conasauga group, the formation shown in red here. And within the Conasauga are an alternating package of shales and carbonates. And the Rogersville Shale, highlighted in red here, is one of these shale units. KGS actually was involved in identifying Rogersville as a source rock back in our Rome Trough Consortium study. In 2002, we had a core from the Rogersville and it identified total organic carbon that was sufficient to generate hydrocarbons. We identified it as the source for the oil and gas being produced from the Rome and Conasauga in Elliott County. The TOC of this rock ranges from anywhere from 2 to almost 5%. That's lower than, say, the Devonian Shale, but still pretty good and certainly sufficient to generate hydrocarbons. And it is much deeper, anywhere from 5,000 feet if you go over into the big sinking area in Lee and Wolfe counties, down to about 10,000 feet in Lawrence County. So quite a bit deeper than the Berea. Fairly thick unit. It's up over 1,000 feet thick. But it's not uniformly distributed across the Rome Trough. It does vary in thickness, and it's not present in all parts of the Rome Trough. And not all of the Rogersville is organic rich either, so it's not a uniform blanket of source rock quality shale. This is a core from Wayne County, West Virginia, from an old Exxon well. This is really the core that keyed us into the potential in the Rogersville when we got these cores from Exxon. And so this dark gray to black shale and interbedded siltstone is the formation that's of interest in producing from the Rogersville. This is a map that actually making a map like this can be a little dangerous if you work for a state agency. You can ask our friends in Ohio about their experience with the Utica and the Marcellus, but we were getting so many inquiries about the Rogersville. John Hickman and I sat down and came up with a map of where we thought the Rogersville would be productive. And so again, the Rome Trough Basin outlined in yellow here, and the Hatchard area dashed here. Please note the dash. This is very speculative, based on very limited information, is where we think the Rogersville Shale could be productive in eastern Kentucky and adjacent parts of West Virginia. The play got started in Lawrence County. A company out of Denver called Cimarex Energy formed a subsidiary called Bruin Exploration and drilled the Sylvia Young well in Lawrence County here. That was the first well to actually test the Rogersville. We have some preliminary production data from that well, which is very limited, so we're not sure what to make of that. The volumes they reported were very small. They have since re-permitted that well to drill a horizontal leg out of that vertical hole, so we'll see what kind of production they get from the horizontal wells. After that, Cabot drilled a well up in West Virginia. That well is currently producing gas from the Conesaga interval. We're not sure the exact formation. That information is confidential, but that well is producing dry gas. EQT drilled a well in Johnson County, a horizontal well under the name of Horizontal Technology Energy. That well is confidential right now. And then Chesapeake has drilled 2 vertical wells in Lawrence County, and again, information from that, those 2 wells are not available. One of those wells has been re-permitted as a horizontal. And then finally, 2 undrilled permits. Bruin or Cimarex is going to drill another well in Lawrence County, and another company up in Putnam County, West Virginia. So this is the status of the play right now. The big thing to know, Cimarex has sort of proven the play concept. They were able to bring hydrocarbons to the surface in the young well, but the economics are certainly far from being proven. So we don't know if this play is really going to be economic at this time. So what sort of impacts have we seen from these new plays? First and foremost, it has changed our state oil production, all from the Berea, obviously. It's too early to say what impact the Rogersville is going to have on production. It's triggered some new regulations for unconventional wells. When all these new unconventional wells were being permitted, we realized that our oil and gas regulations were a little out of date. We weren't prepared for some of the things that needed to be dealt with in terms of... Yeah, Rick?
David, I know data is limited, and it's probably too early to tell, but if you see anything that might suggest an oil window in the Rogersville.
Yes, Cimarex did report oil production from their first well, the young well, produced both oil and gas. So they reported about 115 MCF of gas and about 20 barrels of oil, which are pretty small numbers, but we don't know how that was measured or when it was measured, and you know, whether that's really a true representation of what that well was capable of. So, but yeah, certainly West Virginia, that deeper area where the Cabot well is located, appears to be in a dry gas area, whereas eastern Kentucky appears to be in either a wet gas or maybe an oil window. And that's part of the reason Cimarex was focusing their efforts on Kentucky. It's shallower, less thermally mature, and better chance of liquids. Yeah.
So how many total pilot projects in the state of Kentucky do we have going right now?
What sort of pilot project?
Well, like you were talking about the wells that were
They're not pilot projects, those are actual exploration wells.
exploration wells. All right, how many total exploration wells do we have? Do you know?
I guess I don't understand the question in terms of actual.
Horizontal
Four
wells.
that have been.
Oh, how many horizontal wells have actually been drilled?
Yeah.
Oh, probably close to 1,000. I mean, there's a lot of older ones in the Devonian Shale that were drilled. How much?
Probably closer to 1,500 at least.
1,500. Yeah, I mean, the horizontal drilling in the Devonian Shale, the Ohio Shale, and also some in the New Albany Shale in Western Kentucky has been going on for well over, a decade, 15, 20 years probably. This newer stuff in the Berea and the Rogersville, like I said, there's about 5 wells in the Rogersville, and I'd say there's probably 100 wells in the Berea now, something like that.
Didn't realize it was quite that much.
Right. Okay.